The flies sang in Harrenhal like black-stroked fiddlers, a low droning that seeped through leather and plate and into the skull bones. Tywin Lannister kept his tent flap open to the warm stink of the lake. He preferred the truth of a smell to perfumed lies. Candles burned like patient stars over the table, and the table was all a realm. Squares of hide and parchment stitched together, red markers where his banners lay and wolf heads and trout and the stark tower of Fry. A letter lay alone beside the wine ewer, sealed with the stag in fiery heart. He had broken the wax himself. He had read the words, then read them again. The law is mine, Stannis Baratheon had written in his hard, unlovely hand. The truth is mine. Come and save your house from ash. Tywin let his thumbprint dry wine into the paper. He remembered Lord Arryn's careful eyes, the way the old falcon had looked at him more than once at court, as if to weigh a stone in his palm. Tywin had not liked being weighed. He remembered a boy with golden hair tossed up into light by a woman laughing, then her laughter gutted by rumor. He remembered his father's soft fingers and soft will and soft creditors. I would know how far truth runs, he said, not raising his head. Kevin. His brother came like a sober shade. Abstemious, exact, eyes that never left the business at hand. My lord, in the last week what has been heard from the capital? Varys says little, Kevin said. He wrote that bread wagons were taken outside the city. A riot over a dung-strewn loaf ended in 3 men hanged and 1 earless baker. The queen has called for more gold cloaks. Janos Slint wants a manor. Little finger, Tywin lifted a finger. That one is a plague that feeds on hunger. Kevin inclined his head. Have you spoken with the maesters? Tywin asked. On the matter of seed and scion? Kevin looked to the tent's opening, a small tell. I have asked discreetly. The book of lineages that Lord Arryn favored is very clear on the Baratheon inheritance. When mixed with Lannister gold, spare me the dye jar, Tywin said. The flies thickened at the lamplight and he flicked them away with a folded scrap of boiled leather. Is our grandson our grandson? Kevin did not answer quickly. He was a good brother that way. Good generals deferred to silence now and then. If these words are truthful, Kevin said, then no. And if a realm bleeds for a no? Tywin asked. We are past the season of if. He touched Stannis's letter. If we tie ourselves to a crime, we will not see spring. Footsteps approached outside. Kevin made to withdraw, but Tywin said only, send him in. Tyrion ducked through the flap without invitation. Cloak wet with lake air. His mismatched eyes alight with the mischief of survival. Father, he said, tasting the word as if it might be poison and delightful both. The cooks have discovered a new way to ruin a fish. You would admire their ingenuity. May I? Tywin gestured at the wine. Tyrion poured for himself, smelled it like a true courtier, then drank like a sellsword. I received a copy of Lord Stannis's broadside, Tyrion said lightly. The man was never much of a jester, but he does know how to throw a stone through a window. He names the royal children. He stopped. He was not a complete fool. He names them, Tywin said, and he is not the only one to know the braid of a bannerman's hair. The flies sang. Tywin did not let his voice shift. Tell me why we ought not strip our own house and go begging for pardons. Tyrion's face altered by degrees. He took another swallow, set the cup down with ceremony, and kept his voice low. Because begging does not suit you, he said. Because the world watches how a man carries his back when the sun fails him. Because if we bend to Stannis like dogs, he will clip our ears as an offering to his dreary god. He licked his lips, a nervous child's habit he had never effaced. But, he added, if we stand so that we may seem to kneel, and kneel so that we may seem to stand, we might contrive a more comfortable arrangement for the realm and a marginally less fatal one for ourselves. You are thinking of arrangements when the ground is breaking underfoot. Tywin reached and turned the letter with a forefinger. Stannis has law. Tyrion scratched his cheek, thoughtful. He does. He also has a fleet, a grim wife, and a red priestess who burns men like driftwood. He will not be loved. Children need not love the rod that makes them stand, Tywin said. He stood, and the tent changed shape around him as if it, too, rose to attention. I do not require love. Stannis does not require love. The realm requires a single name. Ah, Tyrion murmured, and not the one on the throne. Tywin met his son's clever little eyes. The city is not a throne, he said. It is a knot of roads where supplies go to die. Our gold cloaks were bought by a moneylender and a queen. They will be bought by the next. He flexed his hands. They were large and precise, the hands that had built an army and bought 1,000 loyalties with cold coin. Joffrey is a boy who thinks a crown is a toy. Cersei, he let the word fall. For a heartbeat, the droning flies seemed to lift their note. When he spoke again, he did not use his children's names. We have been false for the sake of a lie that does not even serve our house well. We have been rash when patience would have cost less blood. Stannis is brittle, but he is not false. If the world sees me place my banners at the foot of law, all the fractures mend to one. Tyrion's laugh was a short bark. You would surrender the city to him? Father, men call you many things in cups, but penitent is not among them. Spare me your cups. Tywin took Stannis's letter and held it to candlelight as if it were a coin. We will not surrender anything. We will give him what he cannot take. The city, the truth, the men who stole both. We will set the terms. We will write the letter that writes the realm. Tyrion watched him like a player measuring a board he had not known existed. And the price? Tywin thought of his golden boy in a cold camp, captive in a northern lord's pavilion, swordless hands and a lion's mane he would not cut. He thought of his daughter's face at 15 when she had been told she would wed a king. He thought of his grandson snarling at a butcher's boy's blood. He drank nothing at all and felt the heat of the candles on his cheekbones. Some prices are paid or the shop burns, he said. Tyrion dropped his gaze for a fragment of a moment. If you ask a favor of Lord Stannis, he will demand a debt from men who hate debts, he said softly. He will not forget Jaime. He will not forget Cersei. He will not forget that the law requires a lash. The law requires order, Tywin said. He does not yet understand that order requires coin and men and ships and bread. He will learn to accept what is required. We will teach him. Send to Varys. Tell him to prepare the ground. The city watch must change hands. Janos Slynt will be moved, and I will have his throat as well, time permitting. There are times when gratitude smells like dead fish. I can do nothing without a writ, Tyrion said. Unless you prefer I use the queen's. You will go to the capital as hand, Tywin said. He watched his son's mouth open and snap shut like a fish. You will remove Slynt. You will place the watch under a captain who can be bought once and then held by the throat forever. You will keep Cersei from turning the city into a bonfire. You will curb the boy. You will deliver to Varys and to the faith every scrap of proof Lord Arryn had that the royal issue is not royal. You will prepare to open the gates at my word. At your word or Stannis's? There is no difference if I choose it. Tywin rolled the scroll over and pressed the broken seal into the wax to shape his thought. I will write to Dragonstone. Tyrion tilted his head. And what will you offer him? Legitimacy, Tywin said simply. Bread for the city, the lock to the lion's purse. A marriage bond for his daughter that will make Highgarden stop counting their gardens and start counting what happens when winter plows them under. The heads he cannot afford to collect. Yours. My obedience. Tywin allowed himself the smallest of smiles, a baring of the teeth. On paper, it is very unlike you to intend anything but victory, Tyrion said. This tastes of compact. Victory is sometimes a document. Tywin handed him a clean parchment. Go, pack light. The road is ugly. Take men who do not drink. Kevin will send you the seal. Tyrion studied the blank sheet as if it might speak. If this fails, he said, the wolves will throw their bones in the river and call it an offering, and the trout will eat us in little bites, and Lord Fry will pretend to weep. If this fails, Tywin said, it will be because we were sentimental. Do not be sentimental." After he had gone, Tywin stood alone and listened to the flies, the lake, the low thunder of a distant forge. He thought of his father, of failures and soft hands. He summoned the scribe and spoke the words that would bind him to a man he did not respect and a god he did not acknowledge and a truth he could not ignore. "My lord Stannis, rightful king of the Undulls and the First Men, on Dragonstone the sea spoke harder tongues. Stannis Baratheon stood in the wind on the terrace beneath the carved gargoyles. Jaw set so tightly that his beard cut his skin. The letter from the west was at his back like a banner. Davos stood at his side in plain wool and leather, fingers fidgeting with the memory of missing tips. So he comes crawling," said Ser Axel Florent, his eyes greasy with triumph and the promise of other men's goods. "Tell him to lay his head on the block and I will." "You will do as you are told," Stannis said without turning. The wind whipped the red woman's hair into serpents, and Melisandre smiled as if the wind were her idea. Stannis's eyes remained on the horizon, the color of old slate. Davos said nothing. He had learned that with Stannis' silence was a rope thrown to a drowning man. He would take hold when ready or drown out of pride. "Tywin Lannister offers himself," Melisandre said softly. "He sees the flame that crowns you and would warm his hands. Beware a man who thinks he owns the hearth." "I do not need him," Stannis said, but there was weight, not heat, in the words. "You need his gold," Davos murmured. "You need his gates and his roads, and you need an end to a war you have not yet started in earnest. If the city opens, you do not need wildfire, you do not need to starve them into reason, and fewer women will weep." Stannis looked at him then, and Davos swallowed. He was never comfortable when those pale eyes fixed on him, as if the king's stare measured marrow. "He has a price," Davos said. "But so do you. You can ask it." Axel snorted. "Ask for all of them. Burn the queen. Burn the children. Take the Kingslayer's hand. Make a pile high enough to light the whole city." "Lord Axel," Stannis said, "I remember when your house bent knee to mine and promised not to speak in my hall unless bidden. Consider yourself bidden henceforth when I say your name." Axel flushed. The red woman laughed quietly into the wind. "What does he want?" Stannis asked. Davos glanced down at the letter he had read twice and could not forget. "He wants order. He wants the Lannisters safe in their rock. He wants to present you with what you could never walk in and take, wrapped in golden ribbons, so that he may say the realm was saved by his hand." "The realm will be saved because it is mine," Stannis said, but he rubbed the bridge of his nose with his knuckle in a rare human weariness. "He will think to bind me with his kindness. He forgets I do not bend." "Then do not bend," Davos said quietly. "Make him kneel. Make him swear as every lord must. Take his submission, not his alliance. Demand the boy. Demand the queen. Demand Janos Slint and Littlefinger. Demand the heads that law requires." He swallowed. "Mercy where it gives more than blood. The small folk watch how a king uses his sword. A maidenhead thrust through on a point binds fewer oaths than a winter loaf." "Spare me metaphors," Stannis grunted, but Davos saw a slight softening at the corner of his mouth that belonged to no humor, only to a grim acknowledgement that a man could be right and that being right tasted like seawater. "Send for parchment," Stannis said. They wrote together with the wind tearing the edges of the king's tent and the fire dancing with a hunger that had other faces. Melisandre watched them and said nothing. When Stannis set his seal, the red wax shone like a wound. Tyrion reached the city in a hood and dust and found it as Varys had promised him. Hungry, sullen, watchful. He entered by the mud gate behind a wagon of pumpkins that he suspected would never be eaten as pumpkins. By dusk they would be soup, and by dawn they would be a reason for a knife. He slipped into the red keep by a back door he had learned long ago and found the keep as he had imagined. Too many guards, too few wits, corridors that smelled like melting candles. The small council chamber was a hive struck with a stick. Littlefinger smiled at him with thin amusement, as if he had been expecting a better show. Varys lifted his hands in delight and made a low trill that could have been welcome or warning. Pycelle drooled into his beard for a moment, then hawked like a heron. The queen was not present, nor was the boy. "Ah," said Littlefinger. The dwarf hand returns. "Have you come to be loved?" "I came to take your chair," Tyrion said cheerfully, and planted the lion's seal on the table like a flung gauntlet. "I suggest you move your pretty tail." They looked at the steel like men look at a thundercloud. "Whose authority?" Pycelle bleated. "The Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, you're better," Tyrion said. "And now mine in this city. I have orders for the gold cloaks, a gift for Janos Slynt, and a suggestion for you all. Do not be here when I give it." "Janos is the queen's man," Littlefinger murmured. "He caught me a hand once. He is very faithful to coin and queens." "He will be faithful to an express coach to the wall," Tyrion said. "Someone fetch me Bronn, and Tommen's guard, Ser Mandon Moore. I would talk of loyalty." Bronn came because Bronn smelled opportunity like a wolf smells sheep. After a few hours of quiet moving and iron discussion, Janos Slynt was carried off to a ship with a royal writ in his hand and a secret in his heart. By morning he would be a black cloak. By noon he would be swearing he was born to snow. The commander of the city watch, in his place, was a square-faced man with a wife he adored and a fear of losing her. Tyrion put Bronn in the man's ear like a knife and felt the city tilt beneath his feet to a more comfortable angle. Then he went to his sister. Cersei stood before a window with her hands on the stone as if it were a lover. Sun bruised itself on the bay and slid itself toward the sea. She was drinking, and her hair was the color of memory, gilded and untrustworthy. She did not turn. "You have something to say?" "I have 1,000 things to say," Tyrion said. "The simplest is the most dangerous. Father has written to Dragonstone." She turned then with such quickness that the goblet leapt in her hand and spilt red on her fingers. "What?" "He has written to Stannis that he will recognize his claim." She laughed, a raw sound. "Does he think I will go quietly into the September and take the veil like some base-born girl? He cannot mean it. He cannot." "Father does not require you to mean anything," Tyrion said. "He requires you to obey. That is what we have always been bred to do. We are tools that happen to bleed." She came to him in 2 steps and struck him open-handed. He took it. Her breath smelled of expensive wine, and her eyes, once so bright, were a hot, brittle green. "Tell him I would rather burn this city to cinders than have Stannis' hands on it." "Please do not," Tyrion said mildly. "For wildfire burns both ways, and I have moved the pyromancer's store keys." He smiled, small and mean. "I am Hand. You can rage and rage, but the seals say what the seals say, and Janos Slynt is already on a ship." Her face went very still. She stared at him as if she were counting out loud in her head. "You think you can take my son?" "I think Stannis will ask for him," Tyrion said. He did not look away. "I think Father will give him. I think he will not live long after. That is what I think, and I do not sleep better for it." He cocked his head like a crow. "But if you insist upon some piece of this, let it be this. Do not try to run. You will not get far, and there are eyes everywhere. I would spare Tommen and Myrcella if I can. Father would, as well, for different reasons. Help me. Spare them," she whispered, as if testing the distance between mercy and contempt. "You hate me. I have never hated you half so much as you hated yourself for being born a woman," Tyrion said. "We are past what I feel. I am a hinge, Cersei. The door swings or falls depending on how I am oiled." She looked at the window again. A single hawk flung itself over the water and hung in the last light, then was gone. "Go, imp," she said. "Do what men of your size do best. Creep and pry. You will die of it one day. I will send wine." He bowed as if to a queen. The armor of courtesy had always been his best defense. He left her, then found Varys in a hallway, as if Varys had been laid out there like a rug for his passing. "Do not tangle your feet," Varys murmured. "Have you told your birds to sing the right tune?" Tyrion asked. "They trill with all their hearts," Varys said. "A pity about not profit from. Tell me the one thing I cannot pay you to tell me," Tyrion said. Varys smiled with his eyes. Lord Tywin intends to ask His Grace Stannis to keep you in the chair you have so ably appropriated. He knows you like a sharpened quill in a dangerous hand. He will not give it up easily. And the city will riot if you are not careful. Bread, dear Tyrion. Bread. I will bake, Tyrion said and felt, for a strange instant, like a boy again standing at a table too tall, reaching for a knife to cut rope he could not see. The raven that carried Stannis's answer arrived before dawn. Its beak was as black as the cave at the bottom of the sea, its feet as dirty as truth. Tyrion broke the wax with tired fingers and read. Stannis required. He required the city gates in working order and the gold cloaks cleaned of bought men. He required that the boy be delivered to the hall of the small council under guard, and that he be there to ask one question and to receive the one answer that mattered. He required that the cowards be named. He required that justice be done according to law and not circumstance. He required oaths. Tyrion sat and let wakefulness slide over him like cold water. Then he sent for Bronn and for the captain of the watch and for the high septon, who smelled of oils and old pride, and told them all what would be done. Bronn grinned like a cut purse. The captain licked his lips. The high septon protested and talked of the gods. Tyrion said very softly, "We can do this in the presence of images or in their absence. Either way, men will die." On the day Stannis's fleet hove into the bay like a line of iron knuckles, the city did not burn. The dragon's head prows slid between pilings and rat-snared ropes, and men in rough-woven cloaks looked up from mending nets, and new history measures itself not only by music and banners. The small folk watched with the faces of those whose hopes had been eaten too often to be fed cheaply. The sky was a winter clear, though it was not winter yet, and the sunlight turned the water to blades. In the great hall the Iron Throne sat like a mistake everyone had agreed to live with. Joffrey Baratheon, Joffrey Lannister, if names meant anything, sat upon it. His legs did not quite reach the step. His jaw was clenched, his eyes hard as a hawk's and not half so wise. Cersei stood at his side, a green gem at her throat. Pycelle lingered like a ghost that had forgot how to leave. Tyrion stood below them with scrolls in his hand and the city on his back. "The Lord of Dragonstone approaches," said the herald. His voice was too small. His heart, Tyrion thought, was better. "Let him crawl," Joffrey said loudly. The doors opened. Men entered in a black wave, plain and stiff and hard-eyed. Stannis came at the point, not tall but taller than Law. His jaw clenched in a face that looked carved out of sour stone. To his right walked Davos Seaworth in a cloak a lord might wear if he had one and did not like it. To his left, Melisandre glided in red as if the hall were a hearth built to praise her. Behind them came men Tyrion did not know and some he did, grim storm lords with the mouths of cliff faces. Tywin Lannister entered with them, not at Stannis' back but not far, and the sound that went through the hall might have been a sword drawn in 10,000 grates. Cersei's fingers tightened on her son's arm. Joffrey's chin went up. Sirs Boros and Meryn shifted their feet and looked from one man to another like dogs too well fed to remember how to bite. Stannis walked until he was 2 steps from the throne and stopped as if a line had been drawn that only he could see. The hall held its breath. "By what right do you?" Joffrey began. "By the right of birth and law," Stannis said. His voice was roughened by salt and years of being ignored. "I am Stannis of the House Baratheon, by all rights king of the Undulls and the First Men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm. You are not." Cersei's laugh was a thing of knives. "You dare," she said. Tyrion stepped forward. He had expected this moment and not expected it. "Your Grace," he said to Joffrey, and the title tasted as if it would break his jaw. "The King of Dragonstone asks a question. Permit him." "I permit nothing," Joffrey snapped. "Seize them, kill them, hang their heads on the—" "Joff," Cersei hissed. "Ser Mandon," Tyrion said, and the Kingsguard drew a step closer without looking at either boy or dwarf, his face as blank as a white-painted door. The city watch moved along the walls like a tide, Bronn's knife smile bright in the background. Tywin stood and did not stand forward, but his presence pressed the air. Stannis did not reach for a sword. He took a paper from Davos and held it up, and the seal broke with a little sound that carried too far. This is the proof of what most men already know and all men whisper. The former hand of the king, Lord Jon Arryn of the Vale, died with this work very nearly finished. The late Lord Eddard Stark completed it before his murder. The seed of House Baratheon is black-haired. It has ever been so. The 3 children of the late king's widow are not the late king's children. He took a step to the side and held the paper out square to the hall. Faces leaned and squinted and did not need to read to believe. Tyrion watched the queen's mouth, which had turned to a white line. "It is a lie," she said. Tywin's voice cut the hall in half. "No," he said. It was the first time he had spoken since entering, and his voice was quiet in a way that made men straighten. He looked at his daughter as if she were a soldier who had failed at drill. "No, Cersei," he said. "It is not a lie." Silence then, a true one, not even the scrape of a heel. Tyrion thought his heart would be heard crawling back into whatever little hole it kept for such moments. Joffrey's face twisted. "Grandfather," he said thickly. "You are your mother's child," Tywin said, and his eyes did not flinch from the small, pale fury on the throne. "And her sin." Cersei made a sound between a gasp and a growl and reached for Joffrey's arm. The boy yanked free, all pride and hurt. His voice broke on a word, and that was the last boyish thing about him in that moment, because abruptly he went for the dagger at his waist like any cornered thing. Bronn stepped forward, but Stannis had already lifted a hand. Davos moved in a blur that belied the heavy joints of a man who had mended nets and run black nights. He closed a hand on Joffrey's wrist. Not hard, simply human. "Don't," he said. For an instant, the entire hall was a held knife. Cersei's fingers flew to her throat. The Kingsguard looked at one another with starved eyes. The High Septon muttered a prayer to gods that might not be listening. Then Joffrey jerked. His face changed to something childlike and lost. He shuddered, and the knife clattered on iron steps. Tyrion moved. He went up the steps and put his small body between the throne and the world and said loud, "This hall is now a court, by the king's writ." He inclined his head toward Stannis. "And the assent of the Lord of Casterly Rock. No blood will be shed here without the order of law. Ser Boros, Ser Meereen, stand down. Ser Mandon, if either of them moves, kill the other. Varys, see that the doors are barred." Tywin's head turned once, and his eyes brushed Tyrion. Approval was too ornate a word for what that was. It was acknowledgement, perhaps for the first time since a child had climbed onto a chair to pull a book and fallen. Stannis lowered his hand. "Cersei Lannister," he said. He would not use her married name. Law forbade it on his tongue. "You stand accused of treason and adultery before the gods and men. Your son stands accused of being what he is. The law requires a hearing," Tyrion said smoothly. "And the realm requires bread today. Let us be simple and decent. We will send the boy to the September. We will keep the queen in comfortable confinement. The city will be told what is true, and no more. And one day soon, when the ovens are hot and the harbor is open and the gates are safe, you will sit as you must and pass what sentence you believe keeps us a realm and not a slaughterhouse." "Mercy," whispered the Red Woman, as if tasting a wine that was not to her cellar's liking. "Law," Stannis said, but he nodded once. They led Joffrey away without chains. That was Tyrion's precise order, and he watched with an odd nausea as the boy went, head high, mouth shut. A child who had loved to scream when he had men to hold his victims. Silence suited him in this instant and made him human. Cersei did not fight when the Silent Sisters came to ask her to walk. She moved like a woman made of salt. When she passed Tywin, her eyes lifted as if to burn him, and he looked away. If it was shame in him, it did not show anywhere but there. The Iron Throne sat emptied. The hall breathed again. Men turned their heads and found themselves in a different city than the one they had entered. Stannis looked to Tywin. "Will you kneel?" Tywin did not kneel easily or often. He was dressed as if for war, and the light caught on a plate like a flare at sea. After a heartbeat that measured itself in other men's futures, He bent and went to one knee. His head did not bow like a supplicant's. It inclined as if to recognize a fact of stone. "I, Tywin of House Lannister," he said, "do swear to uphold your crown and keep your peace, by steel and gold and judgment, for as long as you keep the laws of gods and men." Stannis' jaw flexed. Melisandre's eyes were embers most men could not see through. Davos had the look of a man who has been watching a storm build his whole life and has just now seen it turn a fraction. "Rise," Stannis said, "and see that you mean it." By dusk the city had become different in 1,000 small ways. The gold cloaks at the corners watched inwards, not out. The bakers pulled loaves that had real grain in them. The soldiers in the yard were not drunk. A single boy's voice cried in the street of Flower that the law had returned, and was thrashed for it by a frightened mother who did not want the wrong ears to think her foolhardy. In the Red Keep, Tyrion drank wine that tasted like relief and ash. Varys came to him with hands wringing themselves. "You have performed an act of surgery," he said. "Let us pray the patient does not wake and decide to cut his own throat." "The patient needs bread," Tyrion said. "Bring me lists." "Of what?" "Everything," Tyrion said, and discovered that the word meant a great deal of paper. Tyrell banners reached the Rose Road a week later like a wave of green and gold coming to kiss a shoreline only to find rock. Renly Baratheon was still encamped with the softest of difficulties, making speeches and eating sweetmeats, when the shadow entered his tent and took his breath. It was not much different than what had happened before, if one believes the tales of the small folk told in kitchens, only the hour was later and the witness different. Brienne of Tarth lifted a sword that might have cut a mountain and laid it at his feet and wept without sound. Ser Loras Tyrell broke his knuckles on a table. Highgarden reeled. The Reach Lords were like a field of flowers in a wind that did not move their stems but emptied their heads. They heard that King's Landing had opened its arms to Stannis, that the city was his by law and by a lion's hand, that no casks of wildfire had burst their days into horror, that the queen was held and the boy kept. Their banners turned with a grace that could have passed for conviction. Their mouthpieces called it wisdom. Their house told themselves it was the only road that kept their wives from counting more graves than sheaves. In Storm's End, Melisandre walked the battlements at night and looked east. The flames she loved showed her other fires, blue-white and hungry where no man's hearth had ever been built. She saw a wall tall as a mountain sculpted by hands no warm god would admit to owning, and beyond it, shadows with eyes as old as the first winter. She spoke to Stannis in his solar and told him of a foe not sitting on any throne. He listened, grim, half-skeptical, half-curious in his own unyielding way. "The king's first duty is to secure his realm," he said. "There are still wolves with crowns in the riverlands." "The wolves are not your enemy," she said. "Save for their pride. The true war is not south or west. It is north beyond what men can imagine. In the fires I see teeth that eat sunlight." Davos, who did not love the Red Woman, still found himself standing half in the shadow of her words. He had seen too much at the Blackwater that never happened. He had seen kings rise and drop like spoons in fish guts. He had watched boys become men in the way meat becomes cooked. Change that cannot be reversed. He wanted to feed his sons and sleep and not worry about gods. "Highness," he said, "send bread to the wall. Send men you can spare. Send a letter with your seal. If we do nothing and stories come true, we will be made fools by dead things." Stannis glanced at him. "You would send gold to those who took you for a thief," he said. There was no scorn in it, only blunt reality. "I was a thief," Davos said. "Now I am honest. One day I will be wrong again. Send them bread." Across the riverlands, Robb Stark sat with his bannermen and the map that had begun to look like a hunting scar. He had been named king in the north by men whose voices had thundered in the night, and on that night he had believed he would wear the word like a hauberk. In the daylight he wore it like weight. He had gone to war because his father had been taken and then murdered, and every mile he had ridden since had been for that man's gray eyes and steady hands. Now letters came like flies from all sides. Stannis had the city. The queen was held. The boy was to be judged. The Lannisters had bent the knee in their fashion. Stannis called the realm to him by the right of law, not luck. "What we fought for," said the Blackfish, "was justice. We have not had it yet." "Justice for father," Robb said. "Yes, but every mile out from that circle there are other debts. The river lords who bled because of Lannister host. The Freys who—" "Our Freys," the Great John said, which was not a helpful answer but true as salt. Catelyn's hair had smeared some gray since the trident. Her hands were busy with nothing. That was how she kept from breaking. "If there is a road not lined with dead children," she said, "that is the road I want." "Stannis will not give us independence," Lord Roose Bolton said, voice flat as a winter field. "He is a blunt instrument. He will not give us anything that is not already his by law. He will offer you the wardenship you already have by nature of your lands. He will keep you under his heel. The Ironborn." "The Ironborn can be broken," said the Great John. "They can also break," Bolton said mildly. "Ask the fishermen of the stony shore. Ask no one on Harlaw, for you will not find them in their beds. You will serve a king who would have killed your sister if her name were not Summer," the Blackfish said. "Be careful who you bed to and for what." "I will bed my honor," Robb said through his teeth. "If Stannis punishes Joffrey and Cersei, if he gives bread to the people my father wished to feed, if he keeps the law and does not break it to fit his hunger, and if he lets the North hold its ways. I do not need to be called king by men who think words are crowns. I need to be lord of my folk and keeper of my lands and justice for my father." "Walder Frey will not be pleased," someone said dryly. "Walder Frey is never pleased," Catelyn said. "He will have to live with being neither more nor less him." They sent an envoy, and the envoy was Davos, not a noble but something better, trusted. He came into Robb's camp with common clothes and uncommon eyes and held out his hands as if he had just sold the last of his fish and had coin and a reason to go home. He spoke plain. He spoke of law. He spoke of bread and of the wall where the cold was a different color and men whispered of dead things. He did not speak of gods. Robb listened. Catelyn watched. "You will ask me to bend," Robb said at last. "I will ask you to kneel and keep standing," Davos said. "To a king who will not love you and will not lie to you. It is not a marriage of hearts. It is a contract of roofs against snow." "And you?" Robb asked. "Love him? I am bad at love," Davos said. "But I am good at seeing a man who means what he says. He will not betray your oaths if you give them in good coin. He will expect them to be kept even if it costs more than you thought." Robb breathed out, a sound with snow in it though the day was warm. "Tell your king this," he said. "I will kneel to him if he does three things. He punishes those who killed my father. He sets aside no law for his own comfort. He sends men and bread to the Night's Watch as if his own blood beat black in that order's veins. He will grant the North freedom to govern itself in its own way and will not name southern judges over northern quarrels unless asked. Call me warden, not king, and I will guard these lands as if they were mine, because they are. If he cannot do these things, we are enemies still." Davos smiled, and it was the tired smile of a man who has sailed into and out of worse storms than the one he stands in. "You argue like a traitor," he said. "I will bring your words to my king. Be careful of your friends while you wait. Be careful of your God," Catelyn murmured when the smuggler had gone, and Robb took her hand to feel a mother's bones. Tywin and Stannis faced one another across the map table in the Tower of the Hand. The room smelled of smoke and paper and men who do not sleep enough. In the street below, the market near the Street of Steel had reopened without men killing each other over onion pies. That felt like a wonder. "We will not do priest's work," Tywin said at once. "I will not have you burn men for any god, red or otherwise. The city will not stand for it. The nobles will not stand for it. I will not." "I do what is necessary," Stannis said. "What is necessary is not setting fires you cannot put out," Tywin said, and Davos saw the two men recognize one another. Not as anything like friends, but as different species of the same animal. The small folk are not bargaining counters. They are the water a realm swims in. You foul it, you drown in your own waste. You speak like a baker, Stannis said, glowering. I speak like a man who has had to feed armies, Tywin said. Your justice will look like cruelty if you cannot bake enough loaves to surround it. Joffrey will die, Stannis said. He did not make it a question or a boast. Tywin looked at him for a long time. He will, Tywin said. Davos felt a weight, a pit, something that did not feel like triumph. Tyrion took a drink and almost choked on nothing. Cersei will go to the faith, Tywin said. If the court finds her guilty of the crimes charged, it will be your hand that signs. But we will not do this in the street. We will not make a spectacle for the gutters. We will do it as if we were serious men in a serious city and not cocks fighting in the Bailey. Jaime, Stannis said, and the name had iron filings in it. Is my son, Tywin said, not to plead, only to make a map. He is also your enemy, and worse, he is a symbol. Symbols must be dealt with. He will take the black. Stannis's head jerked a fraction. He will answer for his crimes. He will take the black, Tywin repeated, or die. He is worth more to us as a penitent than as a martyr hung from a gate. The wall needs men who can train other men to stand when the wind hurts their lungs. The king's justice can be tempered by need. If you force me to break on this, I break. I am not going to war with you, Stannis. Not after the city has bent to you and the Reach has signaled its obedience and the North has offered terms that you can accept. I will not start the realm's sad story again because you have forgotten how to calculate. Stannis flared. I have not forgotten how to calculate. You never learned to, Tywin said. You learned how to add up grievances until you had enough to throw at a man's skull. I am teaching you what things cost. Silence, then, and the crackle of the fire and the ink drying on new laws. Very well, Stannis said harshly. He will take the black, but he will go north like a prisoner, and he will live under vows that will end him if he breaks them. And if I hear of him cutting a single living thing but wood, I will string his guts for lamps. He will be watched, Tywin said. He will walk with a guard so tight he will feel it in his sleep. The execution of Joffrey Baratheon did not happen in the street, nor at the September. It happened in a quiet chamber with carved beams and candles that smoked and wept. He was 16 and there was nothing in him that understood anything except that the world should have bent and somehow had not. Stannis stood and watched and did not smile. Tywin did not watch. He counted the loaves that would be baked with the flour saved by fewer riots. Cersei screamed until her voice broke and then stopped screaming because sound is a body's too real house and there comes a point when you cannot live in it. Tyrion stood in a corridor afterwards and vomited into a bucket like a squire too new to wine. Varys stood with him and handed him a cup of water. Your father calls it necessary, Varys murmured. Father has called many things necessary, Tyrion said. That does not make them bread. Nothing makes anything bread except wheat, Varys said, and Tyrion almost laughed. In the north, ravens beat a steady path from Castle Black to anywhere there might be sense. The wildlings gathered like the sea at the edge of a flat shore, and Jeor Mormont counted men who were old enough to die for something other than their own hunger and found that the number did not please him. Jon Snow held a letter from his brother that smelled faintly of wet leather and something like home, and read, I will send you men. I will send you steel. There is a new king who listens to a smuggler and an old lion who arranges bread. If I kneel and it keeps you warm, I am not ashamed. Stannis came to the wall before Winter's jaw shut properly. He came with a part of his strength only, for he was not a man who left the south without a spine. He came because Melisandre's fires had told him to, because Davos had told him to, because the law had been done where it needed to be done and would continue being done with or without his eyes. He came because the sound of the ravens was not the sound of politics. Tywin did not go. He sent coin and men and letters that cut like knives into lazy lords' bellies. He sent stores from the west. He sent a single quiet note to the Lord Commander that said, You have my boy. Consider him a man of the Night's Watch now and not of my house. And if he lives long enough to do something useful, remember that even lions learn to hunt in snow. Jaime went north. He did not go with a smile. He went because his father had stood in front of him with no anger and no love and said, "This keeps us whole. You will do it." Jaime had laughed and said something that was meant to hurt and did not. He had walked with iron on his wrists past small folk who did not know what he had been and only what he was. On the King's Road he had thought of a king he had killed and a boy he had sworn to protect and had not, and of a woman who would drink herself to sleep now and see him in her wine and not in her bed. He had shed, somewhere past Moat Cailin, the last thing that had ever made him feel handsome. At Castle Black, Jon Snow watched him with the look a boy gives a story he has heard and did not believe. The wall was a blue thing in morning light, and under it men huddled to piss into snow that steamed. "You look like a man who has had a handsome life," Jon said flatly. "I looked like many things," Jaime said. He smiled without smiling. "Do you know how to use that sword, or do you just carry it for warmth?" They were standing on a ledge between the world and something else, and laughter felt like a kind of blasphemy. Still, Jon Snow smiled despite himself. "We fight at dawn," he said. "We fight whenever they wish," Jaime said. And for once in his life the word, "we" made him feel something. The wildling host broke against the wall and was broken and then gathered itself again. Mance Rayder sent envoys who spoke in voices shaped by winds that did not care who wore a crown. Stannis's banners cracked in a kind of sunlight that did not exist anywhere else. Melisandre talked of kings in the snow and men whose swords would burn like torches. Davos talked of soup. Men died like men and not like stories. When the first of the dead came in numbers that made hard men believe in things they had not named, the sound they made was not the sound of armies. It was a dry music of feet that did not tire and a white cold that ate language. The wall groaned and the Black Brothers dropped oil and fire and prayers, which were sometimes the same thing. Stannis stood with his jaw clenched, a man who had never been more exactly himself. Jaime learned the shape of a sword in a hand that did not know sleep. Jon Snow became, in the space of a winter's breath, the kind of man that other men glanced at and felt steadier. In King's Landing, Tywin kept the city from starving. He did it with bribes and beatings and balanced loaves. He made the faith agree to smaller tithes for now and a larger voice later. He made the Tyrells understand that Willis would wed Shireen if they wanted fields to be fields and not burial grounds. He made the Dornish think of their children and not their thirst for revenge. He found Littlefinger's ledgers and burned them, with a care for memory that meant he remembered them all the same. He drank more water than wine. He sat sometimes in his chair at night and let the city talk itself into his bones. Tyrion wrote laws that cut with clean edges. He made public the rule that men who beat a baker for short weight would lose a finger, and that bakers who cheated would lose a hand. He sat with Sansa Stark in a garden on a morning when the light was very gentle, and spoke to her as if she were a person and not an alliance. He arranged to send her north. He did not touch her when she thanked him. He bowed. He watched a ship carry her away and thought of a wife he had shared a room with and never had a night with, of a father who would die with an accounting in his mouth if he was lucky, of a sister who had once braided his hair and then despised him. Cersei took the veil. She did it like a queen. The day she passed into the September, 1,000 women watched and made a sound as if they had seen something too beautiful or too terrible to talk about. She wore no jewels. She looked at no one. She moved like a second blade in a fight that had only ever allowed one. She did not pray aloud. If she prayed at all, no one heard. Robb Stark knelt in the throne room that was less a throne room now and more a chamber where decisions were made. He did it with dignity and with the weight of men behind him who had loved him when he called himself king and now loved him because he had not mistaken the sound of a word for the shape of a duty. Stannis watched him and did not smile. Tywin watched him and thought of the day he had first held a sword that felt like it belonged in his hand and the day he had first learned that throats cut silently make more history than horns. "Rise, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North," Stannis said. "See that you keep my peace there, or I will take it back with interest." Robb rose and nodded once. He turned his head and found Tyrion's eyes, and the two of them, a wolf and a twisted little lion, shared a look that said, "We are men in a story we did not write, but we will write our lines clean." That winter bit deeper. In a tower chamber where maps had grown old and men had grown older, Tywin took out a letter written in a crabbed hand on poor paper. From Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander, asking for barrels of pitch and good wool and peppers against scurvy and more men and more bread and more hope. Tywin folded the letter again and again until it was a hard little square. He set it aside. The candle shook a little. He looked at the lion carved on the chair he sat in and thought that a lion was only a cat with better press. Davos, he said when the smuggler entered, summoned from the north for a brief moment of warmth. Tell me how long the stores will last if we send all we can spare. Davos had hands that knew how to count fish. If the snows are kind, long enough to think of summer. If they are not, long enough to make men smile at their children's stubbornness. Bread stretches when men believe. Tywin made a sound that might have been a laugh if there had been any humor left in him. Faith and yeast, he said. I have seen stranger leavening. He pushed a sealed packet across the table. You will take this north. It opens the rock's granaries. If men want to curse me for feeding them, they will curse me for the correct thing. You do not believe in the Red God, Davos said after a moment. You do not believe in gods at all. I believe in winter, Tywin said, and accounts. They sat a moment like men who have stepped out of a storm into a hut and are not yet used to warmth. The smuggler shifted in his chair. Do you think yourself a savior? Davos asked, with no mockery and no hope, only curiosity, the sort that kept him alive in the most dangerous of worlds. Tywin looked at him until Davos felt as if his tons had been undone. I think myself a man who knows what happens when wheat fails and men with knives have nothing to do. I think myself a man who has made fewer mistakes lately than he made before. I think myself a father who would rather see his house despised as rich than broken as stubborn. Saving has nothing to do with it. You save a coin. A realm is something you keep from spending too fast. He did not know then how he would end, whether old age would gnaw him from inside or knife would find his belly, whether his sons would love him or judge him and find him wanting. He knew only that a wheel had turned and he had turned it in a direction that did not, for once, grind so many to powder. At the wall, the night skies lit sometimes with colors that made even hard men think a god had spilled paint. Jon Snow dreamed of a sword that burned without fire and woke with frost on his hair. Jaime Lannister lost a fight and learned more from that than from 100 he had won. And he began teaching boys to cut wood cleanly because it mattered where the blade went even if no one cheered. Stannis listened to Melisandre and to Davos, sometimes to one more than the other, and did not burn men for looking at him wrong. He watched, instead, and remembered a thing Tywin had said. The water you foul is the water you drown in. He kept his court small and his fires smaller. In Bravos, across a different water, a girl with no name learned to take faces as if they were gloves, her heart beating with a list of names that grew shorter and longer in ways that made no sense. In Meereen, a breaker of chains learned how chains grow back if you do not change the wrists that wear them. In Dorne, a prince sat in a chair and pretended sleep while the world pretended he did not watch. The ravens flew still. They flew across a realm less fractured than it had been because two hard men had decided the truth cost less than a lie. The realm did not love Stannis. It did not love Tywin. It did not love anyone. It ate and bled and did not burn. In the quiet hours before dawn, when law and power both seem like men who have fallen asleep at their desks, Tyrion sometimes walked the city alone. He ran his hand along a wall that had once been spattered with pitch and would be again and listened to the river. He thought of his first wife and his second almost wife and his sisters and his brothers and the niece and nephew he had helped unmake. He thought of a red woman whose eyes made him feel like a moth. He thought of bread. He thought of winter. He thought of the way the city had not burned. On one of those mornings, a baker's boy whistled past him with flour in his hair and a loaf in his hand, and the whistle was a tune that had no words. Tyrion looked up and saw the dawn come pale and steady over roofs that had not, that day, fallen in. He laughed. It was not a happy sound, but it was true. On another morning, Tywin found a gray hair that had never been there. He plucked it out and looked at it and felt no triumph, only an odd sense that the part of him that had always been stone had turned a fraction toward flesh. He wrote a letter to no one, then burned it. He sat and listened to the city breathe. He was a man who had built much with fear. He wondered, not for the first time lately, whether he had feared the wrong things. When the north at last shuddered with a long exhale and something like spring crept down from the wall like a thief with warmer hands, men died less and laughed a little more. Stannis rode south for a season to set to rights the lazy lords who had thought winter a good excuse to sleep through duty. He spoke less. He had never been given to talk. He punished when he must and not otherwise. He left fewer fires behind him than he had once thought he would. He went back north when the next raven came. He was not loved. He did not need to be. He was obeyed, although sometimes out of a sort of grudging respect that was better than love in the long making of a world. Cersei's hair turned to silver under the veil. She did not weep where anyone could see. She wrote, sometimes, on pieces of vellum that she burned in a candle before the ink had dried. She lived long enough to see her daughter marry a kind man who did not try to break her. She lived long enough to watch her youngest son learn to speak without stammering, and to hold a sword without quaking, and to look at the world with eyes that had no hunger for cruelty. She lived long enough to hate all of it and to cling to it with a fierceness that shocked her. Robb Stark sat in his father's chair at Winterfell and learned that ruling is not war, and not simply not war. It is a kind of farming. He walked the fields and learned which soil took seed and which did not, which men took a word and which needed three, which women had influence his men did not notice. He sent men to the wall when the ravens came, and he did not send alone. He rode sometimes himself, and when he did, he brought back hands to hold plows and men to sit at tables and tell stories. He was a young man still when he learned that the tale of a king who breaks because of too much life is a song sung by fools. He was not a king. He was a lord. It was enough. Tyrion lost a chess game to Varys and accused him of moving the pieces when he blinked. Varys laughed in his quiet way and said, "I move pieces only when pieces move me." And Tyrion went home and slept badly and woke better. He found in himself a strange tenderness for a city that had never loved him. He found a place in himself where he could stand and not always talk. He found that wine had begun to taste less like necessity and more like choice. Jaime Lannister stood on the wall and watched a sunrise that made him think of a boy he had been and a man he had pretended to be. He held a practiced sword and told a lad with scabby knuckles to shift his weight before he swung. He wrote to his father once and said, "You were right. This is punishment, but it is also work." He did not send the letter. He burned it and watched the ashes rise like birds. Tywin Lannister died later, not of a crossbow bolt on a privy or some other sordid story a minstrel might prefer, but in his bed after a fever took hold of him and would not let go. He died with his eyes open and his hand clenched around a sheet as if it were an enemy he could bring to terms. He had written a great many letters and orders and a few apologies, all of which had been delivered. He had seen a realm saved not by faith and not by love and not by heroism, but by bread and law and the grim calculus of men who had decided to do less harm than their fathers had done. At his funeral, Stannis Baratheon stood in black that did not flatter him and did not bother him and listened to prayers he did not believe. He thought of a lion who had learned to stop pretending he was a god and had settled for being a man, and he nodded once, perhaps to the dead and perhaps to himself. He went north the next day. There was nothing else to do. The realm did not become a dream. It became stubbornly itself. Hard earth and hard men, stubborn rivers, hungry crows. It made laws and then broke them and then made them again. It ate its own sometimes, but fewer children starved in the alleys when snow fell. Fewer bakers cheated and fewer men cut bakers' hands off for it. The wall stood. The wildlings and the Black Brothers learned a kind of life that was not the one they had wanted and was better than the one they had feared. Kings did not multiply like mushrooms in cellars. Bards had to find other things to make pretty. When Jon Snow stood on a high place and watched a world that had not ended because men had, for a little while, chosen bread and truth over pride and fire, he felt something like warmth even in the biting wind. Men would forget who had given them that. Men always do. He drew his cloak about him and laughed into the cold, a sound that went nowhere and belonged to no one and still somehow mattered. Some nights, in the Red Keep, Tyrion dreamed of his father's face when he had said, "No, Cersei, it is not a lie." He woke and lay staring into darkness and thought that words can be swords if you throw them hard enough. He had always thrown his for a joke. He had learned to throw them for a loaf. He went back to sleep. Some nights, in Dragonstone, Davos stood by the fire that had been built too large for the room and watched flickers that looked like other things. He had never seen gods, and he was not certain he had seen truth, but he had seen a realm saved from the worst of itself by the marriage of a stubborn king and a practical lord. He thought of fish. He thought of all the children who would eat. He smiled. On the black water that had not become a sea of fire, little boats moved in the dark like thoughts. Men bent their backs. Women counted coins. The sky turned and turned again. By then the flies had long left Harrenhal for other camps. The candles in that tent had burned out. The table that had been the realm was set aside, nibbled by mice. A piece of parchment lay under a plank where a man had kicked it and another had not found it, and it read in a hard, unlovely hand, "The law is mine. The truth is mine. Come and save your house from ash." Someone had, though it had not been his house alone that he saved. The realm stood. It stood on tired legs. It stood. That, in the end, was enough.